Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we are plunging headfirst into one of the highest stakes debates out there right now, the rapid, messy, and, well, frankly, often terrifying deployment of artificial intelligence in the workplace.
And our mission here is absolutely critical. We're trying to move past the generic arguments, the sort of techno-optimism on one side versus the job apocalypse dread on the other.
Right.
We're focusing squarely on sources that detail what concrete guardrails, what governance, what actual accountability we need right now to protect you, the worker.
And the core tension here, what makes this so urgent, is just the sheer speed. How do we capture those genuine, quantifiable gains? And the sources give real examples.
Oh yeah, they're not hypothetical.
Not at all. We're talking 20 to 30% faster customer service resolution, a significant lift in cancer detection rates. How do we get that without succumbing to all the acknowledged risks?
And those risks are growing. Systemic bias getting coded right into hiring systems, massive new security vulnerabilities.
And the big one, employment displacement at a scale and I think a speed we just haven't seen before.
That speed is the Achilles heel. I mean, the tech adoption is happening now. It's moving at the speed of a venture-backed startup. But the regulatory infrastructure, the stuff you need for oversight legislation, audits, case law,
That's slow.
that operates on a 2, maybe 3-year lag time. So you have this gap, a gap of 2 to 3 years, where AI is making life-altering decisions about people's lives without any meaningful, independent oversight.
And our whole deep dive today is focused on closing that gap.
Before irreversible damage is done.
Okay, so let's start where the sources do, with the necessary skepticism. Because you really have to pump the brakes on the vendor enthusiasm, right?
Yeah.
For a lot of people, the friction here is huge.
It is. The primary skepticism, it centers on what the sources call the hard evidence question. We've seen decades of tech rollouts that promise these massive, transformative productivity boosts.
Right, and they just don't always materialize.
They don't, especially when they hit the real world.
Yeah.
You might see success in a controlled lab setting, processing specific documents or data sets. But the sources say that something like 70% of workplace tasks, the messier knowledge work, have much thinner evidence for these huge gains.
70%. That's a huge number. What kind of work are we talking about when we say messy knowledge work?
We're talking about the high-level stuff that needs real human judgment. Cross-functional collaboration, strategy, client relationships, creative problem-solving. The things where the inputs and outputs are subjective.
So an AI might write a good first draft of an email.
But it doesn't navigate office politics. It doesn't build trust. And when companies try to apply it to that 70% of tasks, the promised 30% gain often just evaporates.
And even where you do see measurable gains, the skeptical view immediately points to the hidden costs. This isn't just about a subscription fee.
Not at all. We're talking significant internal spending on retraining whole workforces, integrating the AI with these fragile legacy systems that were never built for it.
And the constant maintenance, right? The high-touch work to keep the models from, drifting or hallucinating?
That integration point is so critical. Imagine you have a 100-year-old factory and you bolt on the shiniest new robot. The robot works perfectly, but the 50-year-old conveyor belt you hooked it up to keeps jamming.
Because it wasn't built for that speed.
That's what's happening in software. And for mid-sized companies especially, these hidden costs can actually bankrupt them. It becomes implementation failure, not technology failure.
And then there's the quality of life issue, which should worry everyone. The jobs that don't go away but just become fundamentally worse.
Precisely. They become, and this is a quote, more monitored, more pressurized, and less autonomous. The irony is that AI is designed to optimize output, and in doing that, it can turn an autonomous professional role like an underwriter or an editor into a series of compliance checklists.
Like turning an architect into someone who just checks boxes on a form.
You lose the judgment, the satisfaction. It's a massive hidden cost to morale.
And we can't ignore the inherent risks. Bias, hallucinations, security holes. These aren't just edge cases.
They're characteristics of the technology we're still learning to manage. Which brings us right to the employment question. You always hear the historical analogy, right? ATMs came and bank tellers didn't disappear.
Right, their jobs just transformed.
Yeah.
Same with spreadsheets or email.
And that's true historically. But the sources all agree that the sheer speed and the level of skill substitution with AI, it's different. New jobs will emerge is genuinely cold comfort.
It's cold comfort when the new jobs need completely different skills and are in a totally different city. It creates this massive dislocation. So the sources are clear. We need concrete policy, not just optimistic predictions.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's unpack this. If we agree that wholesale rejection of AI is impractical and the sources mostly do, the conversation has to shift. It shifts to demanding better governance. So what were the specific, actionable things the sources agreed on?
The consensus was pretty clear. The issue isn't technology failure, it's implementation failure, poor change management. So to fix that, you need specific actionable fixes, and they have to start before a company ever deploys the tech.
Okay, so what does that pre-deployment gate actually look like?
The first core guardrail is what they call pre-deployment requirements. For any organization over a certain size, say 500 or 1,000 employees, they'd have to conduct mandatory, independently audited impact assessments.
And this goes beyond just the standard tech stuff.
Way beyond security and bias testing. Crucially, it has to include a genuine labor market analysis, a binding commitment to look at the anticipated displacement, the skill gaps, the retraining investment needed before they hit deploy.
I get the goal, but how do you make sure that's not just another box-ticking exercise? How do you give the audit real teeth?
That's where the policy proposals get smart. The teeth come from the enforcement. The second proposal is all about funding enforcement. It suggests a small federal levy, maybe 0.5% to 1% of the implementation cost, on any enterprise AI deployment.
And that money goes where?
It would fund specialized AI audit divisions inside existing agencies.
So you're not creating a whole new bureaucracy, you're just empowering the ones we already have.
Exactly. The EEOC, for instance, gets resources to audit AI in hiring. OSHA gets resources to audit AI impacting worker safety. It makes enforcement self-sustaining because the tech deployment itself pays for the oversight.
That's critical. Otherwise, the audit division is always chasing funds while the tech sprints ahead.
Precisely. And the third piece is addressing scale. A blanket regulation could crush smaller competitors, so the framework needs tiered requirements. A small startup optimizing a schedule has a much lighter burden than a Fortune 100 company deploying AI across all of HR.
Okay, moving from the general to the specific, the sources made this distinction that really hit home for me, the difference between performative transparency and auditable transparency. How do you make it real?
It needs regulatory specificity, full stop. Performative transparency is a press release that says, we're committed to ethical AI. Auditable transparency means companies can't just game the disclosures, they have to report specific, standardized metrics.
What kind of metrics are we talking about here?
Things like algorithmic accuracy rates, but broken down by demographic groups. Is the system 90% accurate for one group, but only 50% for another? False positive and false negative rates. But the most important one is documenting every single case where a human overrode the AI's recommendation and why.
So if a hiring system flags 5 candidates as unsuitable, but the recruiter overrides it every time.
That tells you the system itself is flawed. It puts hard data on the table that regulators and workers can actually check.
But this brings us back to that time dilemma. This stuff is being deployed now in high-stakes areas like hiring, performance reviews, termination. We can't wait 2 years.
That's the interim protection crisis. And the proposed solution is a targeted moratorium, a moratorium on autonomous deployment in those 3 high-risk areas. The AI can be a tool, an analytical tool, but a human has to make the final, accountable call.
Like in medicine, the AI informs the radiologist, but the radiologist signs off.
Exactly. The AI cannot fire the worker.
That feels like it preserves innovation while protecting people. But that phrase, mandatory human review, that sounds like the ultimate loophole. What stops a manager from just glancing at a screen and hitting yes because it's faster?
That is the critical vulnerability, and you prevent it with documented reasoning requirements. If an AI suggests rejecting a candidate and the human manager agrees, they have to write down why they agreed. What independent information did they use to confirm it?
So it creates friction. It forces them to actually engage their judgment.
It does. If they can't justify it in writing, they can't do it. And linked directly to that is the mandatory right to explanation. Any worker subject to an AI-informed decision gets the right to know AI was involved and to get a clear explanation of how it contributed to the outcome.
Okay, but here's where it gets really interesting for me. We've built this beautiful framework of rules, but rules are useless without enforcement. Who ensures HR departments don't just develop some legally safe boilerplate language that makes the whole documented reasoning thing meaningless?
You've just put your finger on the systemic vulnerability of the entire system. The consensus in the sources was that the critical missing piece is independent worker representation in the audit process.
So we can't just rely on individual workers fighting this fight alone.
No, you need institutional advocates.
Why does that matter so much? Why can't the government auditors just do it?
Because the institutional advocates unions, specialized organizations, they see the patterns over time, across hundreds of cases. A government auditor might see one or two instances of boilerplate. A dedicated worker advocate sees that dozens of documented reasonings are identical and can challenge the system itself.
Okay, but let's be realistic. The vast majority of the private sector isn't unionized. This seems like where the proposal gets politically vulnerable.
And that political reality is exactly why the proposal is for a multi-channel model. Representation comes from unions where they exist, but crucially also from certified nonprofit worker advocacy groups in non-union sectors.
And how do you stop the company from just picking a friendly rubber stamp group?
That's the key safeguard. The advocates have to be assigned by a neutral body, like from a rotating pool managed by those federal agencies we talked about. The company doesn't get to pick its own auditor. That ensures true independence.
That addresses the political challenge and embeds that pattern-based oversight from the start. It gives workers a real voice.
Right. Now, all of this connects back to the fundamental question that we started with. We've built these excellent guardrails for if a company deploys AI, but are we asking should they deploy it?
Especially for that 70% of knowledge work, where the evidence for huge gains is still so thin.
Exactly, despite the high costs and the massive disruption to workers.
If the evidence isn't there, why allow it just because the company can comply with the rules? It feels like we're prioritizing corporate experimentation over workforce stability.
And that's why the final requirement is a mandatory cost-benefit analysis, or CBA, as a non-negotiable part of that initial impact assessment. Companies have to document and provide data proving that the realistic productivity gains actually justify the costs and the disruption.
A CBA. But that's inherently subjective, isn't it? Workers in management will almost always disagree on whether a gain justifies a risk.
They will. And that's where the highest level of accountability comes in. The solution avoids a worker veto, which would be politically impossible. Instead, it mandates a negotiation period followed by binding arbitration.
Binding arbitration, so an external panel makes the final call. That's a huge move.
It is. If workers in management can't agree on the CBA after, say, 60 days, the dispute goes to an independent panel of experts in labor law, economics, and technology. They review the evidence, and they decide if the deployment proceeds as is, if it needs changes, or if it's delayed or canceled.
So the dispute over risk versus benefit gets resolved by an independent authority, not just by the company's balance sheet. It makes that core question, should we even do this, an enforceable part of the whole process.
And that structure, the CBA enforced by binding arbitration, is the ultimate accountability mechanism. It says the social contract matters just as much as the tech.
So what does this all mean? We started with this abstract skepticism, and we've ended up with a really sophisticated, actionable framework. We're talking tiered requirements, mandatory impact assessments, independent worker audits, a moratorium on autonomous high-risk decisions, documented reasoning, and finally, binding arbitration on the deployment itself.
And this framework isn't about stopping innovation. It's about balancing the very real benefits with the sober, legitimate concerns about displacement and the messy reality of how this stuff actually gets implemented. The debate really shifts from whether AI is good or bad to defining the specific enforceable conditions under which it's justified.
We spent this entire deep dive building capacity for oversight to protect people from AI in the workplace. And this raises an important question for you. If these rigorous standards audits, the right to explanation, are necessary to protect you from 9 to 5, how much unregulated AI in your own life is already operating without any of this scrutiny? Think about social media, credit scoring, predictive policing. What other domains need this level of governance?
Thanks for diving deep with us.
We'll see you next time.